Welcome to episode 106 of The Shortlist. My name is Johnny Campbell. I'm going to be your host for the next 40 minutes or so. I'm the host of this regular weekly podcast and also the CEO and co-founder of SocialTalent, the learning platform for hiring and talent. And you're very welcome. We're going to be talking this week about something that hasn't occurred to me in 2 years, and that is a massive big event with people in a massive field talking about HR. It is our 2022 RecFest recap. So after 2 years of making sure laptop microphones are switched on, we have our ring lights on, internet connections are stable, in-person recruiting events and talent events finally returned this year. And in particular this summer, we were delighted last week to attend RecFest in Knebworth Park. What is RecFest? I hear you ask. Well, RecFest is arguably the largest talent and talent acquisition event in the world. And it's a festival. If you can imagine a Coachella or a Glastonbury, maybe on a smaller scale, but instead of going to see bands, you're going to see talks about recruiting. But there's still all the food, there's the great weather, there's the entertaining carnival acts, there's the beer, there's the wine, there's the fun, there's the fields, there's no tents. That's what RecFest is, and it's absolutely wonderful if you can imagine it in your heads. And we at SocialTalent ran a stage last week called the Hiring and Talent Management Stage. And by the way, Knebworth you may have heard before. You're going, well, I've heard of that word, Knebworth. Oasis had a very famous gig there many years ago. Robbie Williams had a big gig there as well. They have big gigs every year. And one of our guests on stage was there for Ozzy Osbourne, I think, as she said, 30 years ago. I won't mention who, but that would be showing her age. So Knebworth is a very famous location where normally there's 200,000 people. We do about 4,500, 5,000 people, all in the HR space. But trust me, we're having plenty of drinks and we're enjoying it. So it was awesome. We really enjoyed it. And we wanted to share with you what we learned. But I didn't want to just share with you what I learned because there were many stages and tents running. So on this week's show, I, along with some of my guests who are joining me here, we've got Emma from the firm, Kirstie from the OL 100. They'll introduce themselves in just a second. And hopefully Bill Borman will be also joining us just to give you a sense of what we learned, consolidate in 40 minutes what you missed at RecFest, what you could have learned, and your best bits. Welcome, Emma. Welcome, Kirstie. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show this week.
Hey,
and welcome, Bill, as well. Great to have you on the show. Maybe I'll start with you, Emma. Tell us, who are you? Why were you at RecFest? And tell us about, it was your first time, 10th time. Tell us about your experience.
Brilliant. Thank you, Johnny. So hello, everyone. My name's Emma Murington from the firm. We are a membership organisation for talent acquisition professionals. It was actually my very first RecFest. So not only was it my first RecFest, but I was also hosting the Future Talent stage. So that was everything early careers, which is a particular passion of mine. So fantastic day. Loved it.
Dying to hear more about what you saw and heard on the stage. Emma, thank you. Kirstie, tell us about the stage. Tell about you first, and what stage were you involved in?
So I was lucky enough to co-present the leadership stage along with my buddy just coming in here, Bill Borman. We really were, we believe we had the best stage apart from your own, Johnny. I mean, it's competitive, of course, you understand. Why am I being so bold with my assertions? So I'm part of our 100. I'm lucky enough to represent our 100 members to make sure that we present to them some really innovative and brain-stretching content and really make sure the industry is moving forwards. And I'm also non-exec director to the recruitment events company, who were the clever folk that hosted the event. And boy, was it an event, Johnny. I mean, you explained it beautifully, and Coachella is probably the thing that is best aligned to such an event. But it was work. Who knew?
It was. We got Jared Wheeler online on LinkedIn, who I think was having a bit of a joke. Either he likes the phrase recruiting Coachella or he's laughing at the phrase recruiting Coachella. I'm going to take it, Jared, as a positive vote. By the way, a quick shout out to those of you who are listening live. We broadcast obviously live on YouTube and LinkedIn every week. If you're lucky enough to be crazy enough to be live with us, we'd love to hear your questions and chat and comments for any of our guests here today. But if you're one of our regular podcast listeners, of course, we broadcast every Wednesday evening. Our new show goes out on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you find your talks. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and any links we reference, we'll put them in the chat as well. And we've had LinkedIn users just saying it was an amazing event. If you were there, tell us about it. We're dying to hear what your best bits are as well. And Bill is working to try and join us and log in as well. We'll get to him in a second. I'm going to launch back in, right? So, Kirstie, tell me, what was it like being back at an in-person event after so long? Like maybe contrast, the 2 years between, I think it was Mudshoot, was the last 3 years maybe since the Mudshoot event, which is the last RecFest, and this. How did you feel? Were you nervous? Were you scared? Were you excited? Talk to me about what you felt was the big thing you missed the most that you didn't realize until the day.
Yeah, so obviously it's concerning when you see the numbers expected, then just its natural reaction to feel a little bit anxious that this might suddenly feel like a stretch too far. We've all spent the last couple of years being terribly thoughtful about who we spend time with and how we spend time. Luckily, we, as you alluded, were in the middle of a field. So really knowing that we were in the fresh air made it easier. And actually, any concerns were dispelled the minute you had your first conversation with somebody you hadn't seen for a couple of years. And look, we all connect on Zoom and we've all spoken regularly, but really looking somebody in the eye and being able to see their smile, truly see their smile, was a gift. It was truly a gift. That's so for me, I would say to anybody that was wondering how to spend their time, whether they should continue to be virtual, I would say do it, but do it with thought and care. Our time is so valuable now. So if you're going to step forward into a group, make sure it's a really good one.
I love that. Emma, was that the same for you? Was this the biggest event you've done in 2.5 years? Or
Absolutely. And actually, the very first person I saw was the day before was Kirstie, and we haven't seen each other for years. So it was so lovely to reconnect again, wasn't it, Kirstie?
It really was.
And I think the fact that it was such a large scale event, over 4,000 people, I would sort of walk from one end of the field to the other, which typically would probably take you about 10 minutes, but it took me about an hour because I kept bumping into so many people that I hadn't seen for years and years. So it was such a lovely way to reconnect. And I think because of the format of the event, it was just a lot more relaxed than some of the more traditional conferences that you might attend.
Talk to me about highlights, right? So whoever wants to jump in first, right? I have tons of highlights. I'll leave my highlight till last. But what for you, maybe Emma or Kirstie, what was the big kind of wow moment of the day? And I'm sure there were loads of wow moments on your stage. What was the one that stands out to you the most?
For me, let me start, Emma. I've got 1,000, so I'm just going to sort through the first 100 for you, Johnny. I had the pleasure of standing at the entrance with the founder, Jamie Leonard, at the point we had, 4,000 people patiently waiting to come in, as they would any festival, and seeing the joy and excitement on everybody's faces. So for me, that was the moment where it really came alive in terms of, our speakers. And we had some amazing speakers, but probably when we showed that intro video with Torin talking about what it means to stay connected. And I think Torin Ellis, if anybody, wants to look him up, then he speaks a lot of sense about diversity and inclusion and equality. And his intro video for us was just a really very smart and thoughtful way of encouraging us all to think about our peers and stay connected and what's the value that brings.
I haven't seen this video. I'm dying to see it. I heard it talked about in the last week, and I'd imagine if you follow any of the RL100 recruiting events or RecFest social channels, it'll be posted pretty soon. I love that. Emma, what about you?
So I think 2 levels. So on a personal level, a highlight was just reconnecting with so many people that I haven't seen for years. And it was lovely to have those connections. And I think on a professional level, just the insights that I got from my stage. There's some top class speakers, and I learned a lot, and I see a lot of events. I run a lot of events. I run training sessions, and I just felt that the insights that I gleaned were fascinating. So I think, just the insights in one place were fantastic. I wish I could see all of the stages.
I know many of them were recorded, Kirstie, weren't they? I know there was video cameras on our stage, and we were a smaller one, so I'm guessing there was cameras on pretty much everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely follow the feed, and you'll get snippets of all that went on. And I think you'll probably still be able to see the agenda. There's a RecFest website, so have a look at the agenda, and you'll see some of those brilliant speakers as well. It's definitely worth tracking those people, and I've certainly followed all of them on LinkedIn to make sure that I get to hear their pearls of wisdom.
I'm going to ask Simon's backstage, and Simon just sends the link with the actual video we're talking about. I'm going to see if Simon can get that, play the audio and video of that live on the show. Simon, if you think that's
Brilliant.
good, we'd love to see it and love to broadcast it to our listeners and our viewers here so people can get a sense of what the opening act looked like. While you're doing that, Simon, for me, Kirstie, Torrin was part of one of my top highlights of my stage. And it was towards the end of the day. In fact, it was the last session, and the bars had opened at 2:00 to set the scene for everyone listening. The bars had opened at 2:00, and there was a kind of WhatsApp group going around for all speakers. And it was generally a consensus after 2:00 that some of the stages began to thin out. We didn't quite see the same crowds consistently as folks began to enjoy the sunshine, which had just appeared about 1:00 as well. And people started queuing up for a drink and some lunch and stuff like that. And I was expecting maybe a tail off on the stage. But our final session, Torrin was on there along with Paul Bowles, who's the global head TA for Nokia. And we were talking about inclusion and diversity metrics in a TA context. And the tent was packed. Torrin was passionate. We were sitting on 3 stools and he couldn't sit down. He kept trying to lift his body off the stool because he had so much energy to try and release. And it was the only panel we actually took audience questions on. Because we just didn't have enough time on the other panels of 30 minutes. And we could have taken questions for an hour and a half. That crowd was charged. They had so many questions, brilliant questions. We ran over by 15 minutes. Like, this was 15 minutes eating into somebody's nighttime entertainment time. And everyone was stuck in this tent. And there was like 3 rows of people standing at the back and the sides. And it was just such a high to end on a subject that sometimes doesn't quite get the excitement. Sometimes you go to a talk on diversity and inclusion and people kind of nod their heads and they feel like, I should be here because, someone said it was important. This was a tent full of people who really love the topic and were passionate about it. I just, you don't get that on a Zoom call, to your point earlier, in Kirstie. You don't feel that. You have to be there. You have to be in a charged tent to kind of feel that electricity of the magic of an important topic.
And I think you make such a valuable point that we experienced in our tent as well. The questions that were posed, the interaction from the audience, really on every topic, really showed that this was meaningful stuff. So whether it was about expanding your role in TA, what were the success measures, or whether it was something more technical about employer branding, people were really thinking through what it meant to them and how they were going to apply it in their role. And that's quite unusual for typical events. But I think we broke down barriers that day.
We did. Let's get into the actual talks in detail again. There's so many great talks. Emma, any talks or conversations that particularly surprised you? You go, oh, wow, that made me think, or wasn't what I expected. It was really different. Anything that comes to mind from your stage?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few things actually from each of the sessions which had have really built for me when I was reflecting, thinking that from an early careers point of view, there seems to be a bit of a disconnect between what graduates are potentially looking for in terms of engaging with employers and what employers are actually doing. So Stephen Isherwood from the Institute of Student Employers, which is a graduate recruitment membership organisation in the UK, and I'm just looking at my notes so I remember the stats correctly, but he said 42% of recent graduates actually cite text messaging as their preferred form of communication with companies, but only 13% of companies are actually utilising text-based recruiting as a tool for college hiring. So I was like, okay, that's really interesting as a bit of a challenge there and as a disconnect. And also the other thing was around TikTok, and Lucy Cole from Grow Mentoring, who's the youngest speaker actually at RecFest, only 22, really inspiring. So I'd highly recommend looking at her on looking her up on LinkedIn. And she was just talking about the use of TikTok for recruiting purposes. And you could just see in the audience, everyone sat there thinking, really, we're not on TikTok at the moment. And I had to look just before this and at Just Jobs, the hashtag on TikTok, and there were sort of 2.6 billion views. So thinking, wow, this is a really interesting opportunity for people.
Wow, that is a huge gap. Huge gap. Bill, Bill's just joined us, Bill Borman. Bill, same question to you before we jump in with Kirstie. Any talks that particularly surprised you, or kind of like you had a wow moment? Because for the same reasons as Emma, it was a startling statistic, or just like a speaker that wowed you maybe on your stage.
Yeah, well, mine wasn't a recruiting talk actually. So mine was I was fortunate enough to interview Rebecca Adlington. What a bit of data that she gave was that we have 1 million kids leaving school every year at primary school age who can't swim, and the impact of swimming. I know it's a really strange thing, but the impact of that and how learning to swim is very much it's quite an expensive and class thing, and the impact that's
Bill, just for our international audience, can you maybe give some background as to who Rebecca is, some context for those maybe who don't know her outside the UK?
Yeah, who's Rebecca? Well, Rebecca Adlington is a double gold winner and a bronze medal winner at two Olympics, and also a regular commentator on television and a guest on I'm a Celebrity, who eats some stuff. So known for lots of different things. But I was really into two of the aspects in the conversation that we had. So first one was really around how many increasing number of children who can't swim and the increasing number of deaths and impact on kind of broader society and our thinking, the opportunity we have to impact broader society. And the other aspect was quite a strong conversation around social media. And for people who don't know Rebecca Adlington, Rebecca was particularly harassed, having won 2 golds at kind of age 18. She came in for a lot of social media abuse, and talking about that broader impact on family and dialogue within social media and society, which I'm sorry, I'm not giving you a massive recruiting data. That really stood out for me in the day, just in terms of the conversation, that it was really a strong moment about thinking about responsibility for the way in which we communicate.
It's part of I remember we talked about this thing. You told me about this on the evening of RecFest, and I'd share with you, Bill, and I'll share with Emma and Kirstie. Every month on the SocialTalent platform, we get about 26,000 unique pieces of text feedback from users watching content, and the stuff they post, like it's some of it's horrific about some of the authors and like abusing their looks, and I think it's carried over from social media where people just they type things into systems and they feel no responsibility for what they say and how it could hurt somebody, and it's just startling. I think it's a valid point for anything, Bill, right? It's how we use social media, and we almost have this different personality when we type into this screen of unknown people, and it's horrific.
But it's how do you change that when when you're looking at the narrative that's going on at the moment? So how do you change that in terms of just the real impact where some of these comments land, and how Rebecca told the story. So when she went into the jungle, she her younger sister ran her social media accounts, and when she came back into the house, she threw her phone at her and said, don't put me through that again. And just the level of abuse and the license people think that they can say that it's not something I wasn't knowledgeable of, but I guess I've not seen too much apart from some people, like when I've been out with Joe Lockwood, for example. But the level of there was 2 things that really struck me. One was in the way she was speaking, she was kind of just saying, oh, that's just the nature of the game. I go on television, I'm in the public eye. It kind of an acceptance of it, that this is going to happen. And that made me really sad, actually, that people have to accept that level. And I think we see that on a micro level. That's a macro level. But I actually started thinking about the micro level of some of the things I've seen post our events when people have been speaking, and we go through this debate all the time. We talk about how do we even up the gender balance of speakers and all this kind of thing. How can we expect to do that when there are people on the other end who are really open to really throwing in personal comments and abuse to all kinds of people for all kinds of reasons? How can we expect to even up gender balance or have an equal playing field, or even just show younger people how they should conduct and behave in society in general, when this kind of stuff is, we've almost kind of just accepted it now. We're not saying that, we're not responding, we're seeing these things and we're kind of going, oh yeah, it's another troll attack, and we're letting it pass. And I think we need to, and we can't affect the macro world, but we can certainly start looking at our micro world. Those of us who run events, those of us who have events, those who have a public voice, to think about how we shape the narrative. So we're encouraging people to come in and join in the difficult conversations, and not making. There's so many people I think who feel like I've got a view or I've got an opinion, but I don't want to put my hand up because people are going to attack me or shoot me down.
And Kirstie, what about you? Anything like similar to Bill that was nothing to do with talent or recruiting that hit you, or was to do with talent and recruiting that really struck you on the day?
Well, two things. The first, just to sort of build on my co-pilot's comments about Rebecca. What I also loved about Rebecca's session, she talked about the personal responsibility she took for preserving how she felt about a lot of these comments, and how she, the attitude she adopted to almost make herself impervious. And she had the choice of whether she was going to let these comments affect her. She chose to consider those from people very close to her. Beyond that, it just didn't matter. It was their comment. They owned it. She didn't need to. And for me, I think certainly being a woman who, like Emma, we put ourselves out there, and I'm sure there's room for lots of criticism, but actually we can all choose, all of us, you guys included, of course, choose how we let that affect ourselves. And that for me, I think, is just simple, powerful message. The second session that really stood out for me was beginning of the day. This amazing woman called AJ Thomas, she also sung on stage, Johnny. I mean, anybody that can cut a note at the beginning of the event, and she was breathtaking. But she was talking about the future of work. If you get to see the video, that's one to watch. She sang the theme tune of Frozen, What's Not to Love. But more importantly, she was talking about the future of work. And the comment she made that really went away with me and gave me lots of time to cogitate was that the future of work really needs a leap backwards. And we need to think really carefully about meeting human needs first. I think we get so wrapped up in this, war for talent, and really thinking about clever ways we can get to talent first, whether it's through hiring or employee engagement. And really just taking things down to a human level, I think, is a really smart one. Let's
Johnny,
really be thoughtful.
Yeah, Johnny, I would add to that. One of the things I got back after the talk that I did, that Kirstie Kelly introduced me to, for at the end of my talk, one of the things I talked about was that we're going through a recessionary phase. We're going to see lots of stop-start hiring. There's going to be lots of things. And that one of the things I was fearing, that a lot of our because we're under pressure in terms of candidates at the moment, and we're having to hire in kind of sprint circumstance because there is stop-start, green, red. And lots of people who were in the audience came to me and then said, actually, that's what's going on with me at the moment. We're getting this stop-start, we're getting freezes. There was 2 big points I wanted to make in that talk. One was it wasn't the time to be cutting recruiters, although we were going to go into freezes. And, there was quite a few people spoke to me afterwards that they had concerns about that, about their own positions or the positions of their team. And the other one was that we've done a lot of good work in the last kind of 18 months, 2 years in lots of organisations around diversity and diversity initiatives. And I really gave out a plea to say it's going to get tight in terms of hiring. It's going to be a recession like we've never seen before, because normally you have too many candidates and not enough jobs. We're going to go into recession where there's going to be lots of financial cutbacks, and TA is one of the first places that gets frozen or cut on that. But I have a real fear that that's then going to mean we're going to start looking at things like our diversity initiatives and good work that we've been doing in the last 2 years in this stage. And I probably had 30 TA leaders come up to me afterwards of some pretty significant organisations saying, yeah, actually, that I'm starting to feel the pressure on my diversity initiatives. We're starting to get the push on our ED&I and how we're hiring, because there's such a candidate shortage. We're being told to start dropping that. So the feedback I got from the audience really stood out to me. One is the way in which I think the market is going seems to be the general reaction that was the right kind of call. But the bigger thing was this pressure that's beginning to come to say, okay, maybe we need to rethink ED&I. Maybe we need to because we can't get the candidates. Maybe we need to rethink, change our standards. And I think a lot of the good work we might have done in the last 2 or 3 years is potentially getting unpicked.
And Emma, speaking of those bigger themes Bill's alluded to there, and Kirstie started off as well, like, I know you represent a group of in-house recruiters, right? This is your member network. You know, did you walk away with a similar feel of this conflict that, you know, recession's here, talent is still impossible to find, pressure for TA teams, D&I taking a backseat? If those are some of the themes that I'm summarizing well enough, Kirstie and Bill, do you get similar impressions, Emma, or different impressions?
Yes, I was just going to say, actually, so on Bill's point, so I had the early careers stage, and one of the key themes that came through, not just from the stage, but also speaking to people afterwards and dealing with their questions, was that a lot of people are really relying or leveraging their early careers schemes to drive D&I within their organisations. So looking at it as a potential silver bullet, which obviously it's not going to be. So I think that was one of the interesting themes that came out of the stage. And I think just sort of generally, we, from a firm perspective, we do research every year. And one of the questions that we always ask is, you know, what's your biggest recruiting challenge? And it's a free text box, so people can put anything they like. And normally the answers are so varied. And this year, for the first time ever, 95% of respondents said, you know, recruiting is talent shortage, scarce skills. That's sort of the biggest issue, and that's what's keeping people awake at night.
It's funny, I spoke about this to a private client group 2 weeks ago, and Josh Burson published an article on it last week. I looked into it because I had a sense of something, and I looked into the US inflationary data because it's nice and consistent, and then the unemployment data mapped to that. And there's never been a point in recorded economic history, which is about 100 years old or consistent, where you've had high inflation and very low unemployment. Like, this is a really weird time.
It's weird, Johnny. It's weird. I'm old, right? I'm really old man. Sometimes that means I'm called a veteran, but that means I've worked through 5 recessions now. This will be the 6th one in a recruiting capacity, and the trends have always been really predictable historically. So you get the first warning sign you get is that the hiring starts to go to contingency or short term. So you start to lose long-term commitment towards candidates and roles change. And then you start seeing the freezes in terms of hiring, and you begin to see a funnel. So I had it on stage as two scales, really. What normally happens is you get more and more candidates and you get less and less jobs and more competition. But this current time is really weird because the labour market was kind of exhausted before we went into recession, and because the types of jobs that we have are very polarized in certain areas where we don't necessarily have the skills for those jobs, so that we're kind of mining a very small pool. What we're seeing is the weird thing about this recession is we've got a recession, we're getting the financial commitments, we're getting 20% cut of headcounts in some tech organisations and other places being announced. We're seeing hiring freezes being announced across the TA spectrum, and yet it's still really hard to find candidates. So what you're seeing is budgets getting cut, resources being cut, numbers of people being removed, the time in which you have to hire as a TA team being shrunk down because you're having to do sprint hiring because you get the okay on something and that might be pulled in 2 or 3 weeks. So you want to move really quickly. You don't want candidates in process and suddenly you have to dump out. You've got all kinds of strange things happening in a recessionary time that we've never seen before. So we're having to kind of guess it a little bit in terms of what the right strategy might be. What's the right route to take? I think what we're going to get is lots of stop-start, lots of sprint hiring. And what we've got to do in TA is really have a lot more data, battle a lot harder to keep our teams together, make sure we don't get the cuts, and that when we have downtime, people are meaningfully utilised in pipelining and building and being involved in different activities. So I think but it's very strange because we have recession and we're getting cuts in organisations. At the same time, we've got these whole chunks of talent that we can't find. So it's really uncharted territory, Johnny. Even for someone who's been through lots of recruitment cycles, I've never seen this before. I'm having to spend a lot of time with people talking and saying, let's just figure this out a bit.
I just got a question on this, Kirstie. In the R100, is that also your sense, and is that your sense walking away from RecFest? Would you say that's a consistent theme? Because I know I spoke to so many leaders going, I'm here to hire. TA leaders going, I'm here to find recruiting talent. I had a talk at 1:15 on last Thursday with Stephanie McGinty of Kingfisher, Jennifer Candy of Cargill, and both made a shout out from the stage going, I'm hiring the following jobs. Come talk to me, recruiters. So there are conflicting messages of, I'm here to hire. I brought my team of 30 and we're here to find more recruiters. We can't get enough. I don't know. What was your sense from RecFest and what's your general sense from the R100?
I think that's exactly it. There is I'd love to plot all of the organisations on a chart to see whether there's any correlation between the maturity of the hiring function and their ability to influence the senior leadership of their business, so they're tooling up. As Bill said, don't cut your team. Get it ready for the next wave. Get it ready for the next sprint. And I think what we were able to do at RecFest was hopefully show that there is a need for confidence, stand firm, and all of the education from all of those amazing speakers should help leaders and their teams be able to build the business case in a far more cohesive and competent and confident way. What I loved listening to was the questions around performance and recognition for recruiters. They certainly weren't talking about exit routes, but maybe we were lucky we had the forward-thinking 4,000.
I'll have to lay the data exactly for you on that within the next couple of weeks, Johnny, so keep in touch. But I'm doing a track at the minute to see what it is, but we were actually seeing, but it is kind of, I think what you're seeing is very similar to industry at wide in terms of hiring. You're seeing boom and growth, and still boom and growth in recruiting teams. So it's no surprise that someone like Amazon is continually growing their recruiting team, increasing their headcount. But Amazon as a business is increasingly growing its business, where other sectors are shrinking and feeling. It's very closely linked to the economic cycle. So if you look across, and I'm doing some work with Jamie on this at the moment, and if you talk to the members of the RO100 and you look at the data, you will find as many people desperate to hire recruiters as you'll find people going, if I'm honest, I'm a little bit nervous at the minute about whether I'm going to be able to maintain my headcount. So I think we're in, it's easy to look at the headlines, and there are people who are growing and growing and growing. They want more and more people, and in their businesses, they want to keep growing their headcount. At the same time, there's other organisations outside of kind of supply chain and FMCG, even things like technology, a 20% cut in tech staff at the moment. And if you cut 20% of tech staff, it's logical that you would cut 20% of your tech recruiters. Right? That's a business step that isn't surprising.
If you are like most TA teams, short 30% of your tech recruiters you'd like to have at the moment, and you're short 20% of the tech talent, that cut in forecast doesn't actually necessarily hit you. Like I've seen this on scale with customers. They're relieved that the hiring plan has been cut back because they couldn't hire the team to find the talent, and they knew that the talent wasn't out there. So this actually makes it more realistic to hit their goals.
It makes it realistic to hit the goals. Yeah, the only challenge that they have within that is they're being asked to hit their goals with less money. Sure. Right? If your hiring requirement, in theory, supply chain principle, if the requirement for your service is cut by 20%, your budget tends to get cut by an equal 20%. Where do you find those savings, right? Where do you have to find those savings? So I think TA leaders are having to work from a leadership perspective, which is really the people I'm thinking about in this, have to be closer to so many other economic factors and what's going on in their market, what's happening, much closer to labour market insights, more of an expert voice in their business to guide their business in the right direction. I think it's
Let me push on to a different topic that's related to that, Bill, and I'd love to open this back up to Emma and Kirstie and your opinions of this. I talked to Jamie, who leads the recruitment events company at the end of the day, and we talked about the topics, just a general, the topics there were so less pure recruiting focused than perhaps previous years. And, he commented about our stage was a lot of talent topics rather than talent acquisition. And that actually it seems to be across most of the stages. And it was the sense that, and it's been a growing trend for maybe 5 years at least, that talent acquisition is no longer a pure silo and no longer seen as a standalone solution, that, we're seeing the industry having to think bigger, think about other ways to solve. We had on our stage, we had a big talk about internal mobility. Nokia hire 40% of the professional staff internally. They don't, only 60% actually goes external. That's a different number of different places. With lots of talent leaders who used to be talent acquisition leaders speaking on the stage, like Yasser Ahmed in HelloFresh, who was a TA leader and now leads talent, because his job is not just to find external people, it's develop internal future leaders, L&D, all these different issues, D&I. Like, are you seeing that trend as well, in the talks and in the members of organizations?
Yes, absolutely. If I can jump in there. So I think, and not just from RecFest on the day. So again, sort of, if I look back at our annual membership survey, we ask everybody every year, what are your top strategic priorities? And obviously D&I, EVP employer brand, candidate experience, always in the top 3. But for the first time in 11 years of the history of the survey was succession planning. So we're also really seeing an increase in terms of talent managers joining the firm, or heads of talent. And people's spans of experience broadening as well. So people very much sort of picking up talent management as well. We're seeing sort of a big increase there. So I think internal mobility is definitely being explored as people are finding it hard to recruit talent externally. They're really looking at identifying potential internally. And it was also identified as a skill that hiring managers are not very good at in terms of succession planning. So it's clearly a development area for people.
Kirstie, is that the same for you in the R100 and in the other businesses you work with?
Yeah, absolutely that. And my wry smile was, on one hand, we're in crisis and there's lots of flux and movement and agility is necessary. But maybe this is exactly the kind of economic situation that will force organizations to connect TA with TM, with L&D. Are we actually going to see integrated talent solutions? And we've seen some smart members like Dave Vinton over at BP taking on those roles. Their sole gamut is to make sure that all of the functions become integrated and it no longer is siloed in the way that candidates and then employees are treated. And I think that's a really exciting evolution of our craft.
I'm going to move to that summary point here in a second, folks, right? As I'm going to ask each of you for your piece of advice before we close. We have 3 pieces to try and get out of the way before we close the show. But in anticipation of that, and just to close off on RecFest, because awesome event, cannot, express to the listening audience who weren't there how much they need to be there next year, right? And how great an experience it is. And hopefully we'll see a RecFest version appear in maybe North America soon. What was your biggest kind of takeaway? If you haven't mentioned it already, your biggest takeaway from the day? Maybe, Bill, I'll ask you that and maybe ask you to try and summarize it in under 60 seconds.
Yeah. So I'd follow on from that last point. Johnny, you and I had a disagreement probably 5 years ago when I said that I felt L&D and talent acquisition was going to become a single function. I think we're actually seeing that now. We're seeing a single function in terms of talent and talent mobility, everything from acquisition to development to career pathing. So, and I got that from lots of places.
Yeah, I think it's been coming. I did a Disrupt HR talk in 2017 on it, and I only had about 6 examples. You could find 6,000 examples of it in companies today, and it's growing. Kirstie.
Like a slight adjustment to that. I was shaking my head. I don't think it will be a single function. It will be centers of excellence that are completely integrated. I think the danger of having a single function is that it could become a mediocre version of all. And in talent acquisition, we've really worked hard to make sure that it is seen as an area of expertise, just in the same way that early careers. This is this isn't the same as volume recruiting or senior exec recruiting or any other. So I think explicit areas of expertise is fine, but it surely, I totally agree with you, Bill, it surely has to be, they all need to be integrated and facing the same direction.
What was your top takeaway? Was that still the top takeaway, or anything else, Kirstie, from the day?
No,
generally?
Actually, more about learning rather than even the topics that were discussed. I think what hopefully we've shown from this conversation, we were there to host the stages, and we've all taken away. I've got a notebook, with lots and lots of commentary just from conversations with Bill, to be honest. But if we're, those events should be an absolute opportunity to absorb some really great insight and stretch your mind. And I think RecFest really did that. So I'd say to any professional, whether it's TA, HR, L&D, TM, when they're thinking about how they're spending their time, and time is so precious right now, Johnny. And so if you're gonna find a way to learn and stretch and think differently about our industry, then really think carefully about the sort of event you go to. What was breathtaking about RecFest, as Emma said, is it was that lovely blend of being a social environment and a learning environment. And so all the barriers were dropped. So people didn't mind asking questions. They'd tap somebody on the shoulder they were walking past that they might never have met before. They were having smart conversations. And actually, you can have smart conversations in a relaxed way. Isn't that the inclusive environment every organisation is trying to create? And we created that at RecFest.
The psychological safety, the safety around that. Yeah.
Totally. And
pause,
so
Bill.
me,
Pause it. I want to go over Emma for her top tip and come back to you. Give me a sec.
So my top tip's my highlight as well, and it's probably building on what Kirstie said. So when I was at Unilever, we had a competency called external orientation, because it's felt that people were so focused on sort of the business internally, they really didn't look to the external world for insight and inspiration. So I really felt from RecFest that I got that, and so many people got that. And I know that people are busy, but it's so worth taking the time to get out and about and listen to what everybody is saying, because that innovation, that insight, it drives inspiration. I think the the three go hand in hand, really. So my advice is get out there.
I love that. And by the way, I'm going to ask you, is that your top tip as well? I probably loaded that question wrong, because I'm going to move into
it's my highlight and top tip. I've done two in one, Johnny.
Two in one. Efficiency. Thanks, Emma. I'm going to move to you, Bill. Your response, and also, what is your top tip you want to leave our audience with today?
So I think the other thing that's really important about RecFest, which makes it different to lots of other events, is that you have every level of recruiter. So normally when you go to an event, it's a very specific type of recruiter, usually someone who's got some buying budget. So if you go to an event, it's either top leadership, middle leadership, to people with budget. This, I think, comparing RL100 events to RecFest events are separate things. RecFest, when you've got people bringing the whole team, hundreds of people in some cases, you've got every level of recruiter and every person in every discipline in the same place. And that's unique in terms of a networking opportunity of getting that unique perspective from someone who does a different job to you.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen it elsewhere. There's a photograph of the Amazon team, and they fill a whole conference themselves.
Yeah.
It was crazy. It was nuts. Top tip, Bill. We ask every guest, and you've given it about nearly 2 years ago, a top tip. But what was your top tip you'd like to leave our audience with today?
I think just to become, you need to look closer at what's going on in the broader labour market, understand data a little bit better, and become expert voice to prove your value in the organisation, because I think that's in a batten down hatches time, that's going to be really important.
Peter Coulson from Spotify, the global head of TA for Spotify, spoke on our stage at one point and informed us that he just completed a 3-month course in people analytics in Cambridge, because his boss said, I want to know the data. And he went, okay, I'll go learn it. And
yeah, we need to be doing that.
And I love, you're right, the data part's so important to the conversation, and you can learn it. Kirstie, final word to you.
Gosh, top tip, I think, to Bill's point, but data really matters, and it brings alive the conversation that we all want to have with our senior leadership teams. But we so often look inwardly at the sort of data we're sharing, and it becomes terribly TA focused. Think about, look externally, talk the language of your organisation. It doesn't have to be, a dark art. You're not a politician, but you can make a case with some really smart data that's available to you at your fingertips. Talk to all your vendors and suppliers, because they'll be desperate to give you insight.
I love the cohesiveness of those three pieces of advice. Get out there, talk externally, and get the data. Fantastic advice. Emma Murington, Kirstie Kelly, Bill Borman. It's been a pleasure having you on, sharing those insights. Even bigger pleasure spending some time with you all last week. Great job.
It's great.
Let's do it all again with you next year.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone, and thank you for listening to this week's show. Hopefully that's given you a summary of what you've missed out and you want to do more. We'll put some links to Torrin Ellis's opening video, some links to where you can find more videos from last week's RecFest of the talks. But come back to us next week. I won't be here. My fantastic colleague Holly Fawcett will be interviewing the brilliant Sabrina Petluga, who is the TA Manager of Experienced Hire Recruiting for EMEASA at Boston Consulting Group. And they're going to be chatting about the importance of learning and development, which is a big topic closing out today, and time management, something a lot of recruiters are struggling with at the moment because they're so underwater with the amount of recs and the lack of talent out there. So join us next week with Boston Consulting Group's Sabina Petluga and Holly Fawcett for another episode of The Shortlist. Until then, thanks for listening.